provide first a little bit of context to those who might be listening, and I want to go into just a few details about the motion that is before us today. In terms of context, we're going to be talking about the ArriveCAN app. And for those that might have forgotten, and this is I'm talking to the public, the ArriveCAN app was a key tool to protecting Canadians during the pandemic as we went traveling. And so if we're going to provide some context, sometimes, as we've come out of this pandemic, Madam Speaker, I think we often forget how intense a time it was and how historic a time it was when literally the world shut down on March 15, 2020. And I'm going to be quoting just a couple of sentences from Professor Adam Tooze from Columbia University, who wrote a book called Shutdown. He said that in the first half of 2020, it was historic. 95% of the world's economies suffered a simultaneous contraction. And he said that's never happened before. And then 3 billion adults were furloughed from their jobs or tried to work from home. That also has never happened before. The sum of lost earnings just in the first months of the pandemic was $10 trillion US, more than a tenth of the global GDP. Madam Speaker, the global economy was shut down, and our Canadian government, what we were doing is trying to grapple, what was COVID-19? How were we going to keep Canadians safe? How were we going to sort of ensure that people would be able to afford their bills? How can we protect Canadians? How can we help our small businesses, our large businesses, our societies, our cities? That is what we were consumed with at the time. And I think you'll recall we were moving very quickly, making lots of decisions because we had to move quickly. And so the regular processes that we had in place weren't followed all the time. And so a lot of the decisions around the ArriveCAN app happened during this time. And it's important for us to remember that context. In terms of the motion before us, the motion before us is an opposition day motion, and basically it's asking for a lot of documentation around the ArriveCAN app to be tabled here in the House of Commons in terms of its decision making, and then there's also a portion about collecting and recouping all the funds that were paid to develop the ArriveCAN app to deliver that back. And I'll say to you, Madam Speaker, that I will not be supporting this motion. And the reason for that is that there's already a number of independent investigations that are underway right now, and we have to allow the time for those investigations to be completed. They are being done by outstanding independent organizations. And then also, we have heard already from the Auditor General, and there is already a number of steps that are being taken from the Auditor General, and I believe also there's some recommendations from the Procurement Ombudsperson. And I'll go through a couple of those items right now, Madam Speaker. CBSA is committed to implementing every recommendation set out by the Auditor General's report, as well as the similar report by the Procurement Ombudsman. In addition to all these independent reports, CBSA is also conducting an internal audit to assess their procurement practices. Where there was specific allegations of misconduct that have been made, CBSA has launched an investigation that's still in process and has referred all allegations to the RCMP. So as you could tell, Madam Speaker, a lot of work is underway. We also have a standing committee on government operations and estimates that's also looking into it, and it's right for all these investigations to be underway, particularly when there are concerns about anything that we are doing from a procurement perspective. So, Madam Speaker, I'm now going to move into my prepared remarks on government procurement. Our federal government is committed to ensuring that the procurement of goods and services is done in a fair, open, and transparent manner, and crucially in accordance with policies, regulations, guidelines, trade agreements, and procedures. And legislation, including the Financial Administration Act, along with Treasury Board policies, establish clear requirements for the administration of government, including for contracting activities. Take the Financial Administration Act. It sets out the requirements needed when the government is making public disbursements, which include contracts. So, for example, Section 32 requires that funds are available for entering into a contract. Section 33 deals with ensuring payments are lawful charges against the appropriation and that the appropriation is not exceeded. The Treasury Board Secretariat, through the Office of the Comptroller General, provides government-wide direction to support the implementation of mandatory Treasury Board policies related to financial management and the management of assets and acquired services. The Treasury Board sets the administrative policies for federal procurement. guided by the principles of fairness, openness, transparency, competition, and integrity, all while ensuring best value. For example, its directive on the management of procurement lays out the expectations and requirements that departments and agencies must follow so that their procurements are managed in a way that supports the delivery of programs and services to Canadians. It's also managed in a way that will demonstrate the best value, and it's also managed in a way that is consistent with the Government of Canada's socioeconomic and environmental objectives. This framework supports the management of procurement so that it is fair, open, and transparent. So, Madam Speaker, there are also clearly defined responsibilities for government departments when conducting procurements, including those for services. First and foremost, government departments and agencies are expected to maintain the integrity of the procurement process and protect government spending from fraud and unethical business practices. This is done through internal processes and controls, and through dedicated procurement professionals and effective mechanisms for the disclosure of any wrongdoing. Second, the government departments and agencies are responsible for clearly defining the intended outcomes of a procurement, including operational requirements, expected benefits, and how those outcomes will align with the government's strategic direction and total costs over the life cycle. Madam Speaker, the Government of Canada has clear rules and controls in place to ensure contracting is done in an ethical manner and upholds the values and ethics of public service. In the public service, like elsewhere in society, when governing rules are broken, there are consequences and corrective measures are taken. So, Madam Speaker, just as getting best value is built into the contracting procedures, so is accountability for the spending of public money. For instance, all proposals are required to be reviewed through a conflict of interest lens, and evaluators are required to recuse themselves for real or possible conflicts. There's also the Code of Conduct for Procurement, which sets out clear expectations for vendors and their subcontractors in the areas of human rights, labor standards, conflict of interest, and environmental responsibility. That means the government is committed to upholding and promoting the high standards and values that Canadians expect, and the same is expected from vendors and their subcontractors. I would also remind this House that the government's integrity regime serves to hold suppliers accountable for misconduct. The integrity regime helps foster ethical business practices, ensures due process, and upholds the public trust. And public trust, Madam Speaker, is gained through transparency. That is why government contracts over $10,000 are publicly disclosed on the Open Government portal, so that Canadians are better able to hold the government and public sector officials accountable. The name of the company, the value of the contract, and the description of the work are all publicly available. So in concluding, Madam Speaker, I want to assure everyone in this House, and indeed across Canada, that the government takes all concerns regarding contracting and consultants seriously. The Government of Canada has a strong framework for rules to direct how procurements need to be conducted, and is constantly looking at strengthening and clarifying those rules. It also offers guidance and training to employees to ensure they know, understand, and obey these rules. Madam Speaker, I talked about trust earlier, and that is certainly the foundation of any public institution. It's crucial for Canadians to trust their public institutions. It's also vital for them to trust the employees that support those institutions. Furthermore, it's essential that they trust that any procurement conducted on their behalf is done ethically, fairly, openly, and transparently. And Madam Speaker, upholding that trust is vital to any public institution in this country. The federal government is committed to ensuring taxpayer dollars are spent responsibly and in a way that provides value for Canadians, and it will continue to advance the priorities of Canadians. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And
questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I certainly appreciate my honourable colleague's speech today. Now, she said very clearly that she would not be supporting this motion because other investigations are ongoing. But one of the key points of this motion actually calls on the government to collect and recoup all funds paid to ArriveCAN contractors and subcontractors. When we're talking about having trust in the government that she spoke of at the end of her speech, trust in the institutions, that trust of managing finances is certainly a huge part of that. And so why does she not believe that it's incumbent for this House to ask for the recoupment of that money so that trust can be ensured? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Davenport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for her excellent question. So what I would say is there may be a point in time where it is appropriate to be recollecting some of those funds from contractors in the future. But what I say to you right now, Madam Speaker, is that there's a number of investigations that are underway. The investigations through the RCMP, the investigation through the other independent bodies through this House. They might, in the end, make some conclusions to say there's some monies that are owed back to the Government of Canada. But I would like for those investigations to be concluded before we actually ask for any funds to be returned. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Charlotte St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley. Oh,
I wanted to ask my colleague, at one time in the not too distant past, we put forward a motion in this House to have the Auditor General study the ArriveCAN fiasco. And with respect, the member voted against having the Auditor General actually do that work. I'm wondering if she now regrets taking that position, and if she had it back, if she would have voted for the Auditor General to do that study.
the Honourable Member for Davenport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for his question. I recall during the pandemic that there were a series of votes that came to this House about audits for small businesses, for various different things that we were spending while the pandemic was underway. And I do recall that there was a number of times that I did not vote for those audits to take place. And the reason was we were still heavy into the pandemic. We needed to make sure we were focusing our resources on ensuring that we were supporting Canadians from a healthcare perspective, from an economic perspective. And there is limited resources within our bureaucracy, and so we had to focus our resources. It was never meant that there should ever not be proper oversight or proper spending of our public resources, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires?
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today we are discussing procurement and ArriveCAN, but there were many mistakes before ArriveCAN. So when we look at the government's ability to handle the borders, to issue passports, think about We Charity, think about Canada Life, think about employment insurance. You look at all this and you notice that the government cannot accomplish its basic mission, which is to deliver services to Canadians. I have heard my colleague's speech, and I have heard from many of her colleagues. They seem contrite. They seem to apologize. They ensure us that investigations are underway. But these types of issues keep reoccurring. My colleague earlier brought up ethics. So what does my colleague think from an ethical standpoint about these many scandals which keep reoccurring?
Well, first, I'm going to say, Madam Speaker, that misconduct of any kind in our procurement processes are never acceptable. And I gave a speech for about 10 minutes about all the things that we have in place that will protect, that does everything it can to inform our bureaucracy, our government officials who act on behalf of our government to ensure that they have processes in place, that we are doing our best to actually spend our public money ethically. And when things go wrong, we have a number of mechanisms that actually allow us to look at what went wrong and how is it that we can do better next time around. I started my whole speech about giving some context, Madam Speaker, We actually went through a huge pandemic that had huge economic consequences on our lives and in the world today. So surely there were going to be some mistakes made, and it is right for us to be looking at that right now. And I think that we will make some corrections and do better as we move forward.